Good morning, Gathering Network. I am coming to you with a special announcement and opportunity for you this morning that's going to happen later in the month of November. As we make our way through the Secure Attachment series and conversation together, one of the things that we just learned from Adam Young is that part of the journey to healing is learning to engage our stories in written form. One of the tools that can help us in this process is the Emmanuel Journaling Prayer Experience. You are each invited to join us for a 2-part learning opportunity on Zoom on Thursday night, November 12th, and Thursday night, November 19th from 8 o'clock p.m. to 9:30 p.m. This is hosted by the Gathering Network and Steve and Kim Specker. And whether you've done this Emmanuel journaling process before with us, or this would be a first-time learning experience for you, both men and women are invited and encouraged to join in. Keep in mind that it is essential to plan to participate both weeks in a row to get the full experience. You can sign up this morning at gatheringnetwork.org, and if you scroll down the page, you'll see the little image that you can click on that'll take you straight to the sign up for this experience with us. We love you guys, and we are excited to continue to engage this conversation with one another.
Good morning, Gathering Network. My name is Greg Owens, and this is my wife, Jen Owens.
Hey everyone, it is so good to be with you guys this morning. We are just delighted that you've chosen to spend your morning with us at the Gathering Network. Whether you are a regular or joining us for the first time, we are so glad you're here. It did my heart so good to see so many of your faces on Zoom last week, and I can just picture so many of you now in your homes with your family and friends, kids running around, just gathering for this service as well because of getting to see you last week. So I hope you've been tuning in for our Secure Attachment series. It's been really amazing, and I feel like God is really moving in our hearts right now, and I'm highly expectant that He's going to continue to do a great work in us through what He speaks to us this morning. Our call to worship this morning comes from Psalm 113, verses 2 through 6. And it says, "Blessed be the name of the Lord from this time forth and forevermore. From the rising of the sun to its setting, the name of the Lord is to be praised. The Lord is high above all nations, and His glory above the heavens. Who is like the Lord our God, who is seated on high, who looks far down on the heavens and the earth?"
Amen. As we read through that passage this week, it was such an encouragement and such a source of peace for me. We're just obviously a couple days away from a big election that has kind of been all-consuming on media and on social media. It seems like you just can't escape the influence of so many voices that want to try to influence you one direction or another. And so as we were reading through this passage in Psalm 113, specifically verse 4, where it talks about the Lord being high above all nations, His glory being high above the heavens. Who is like the Lord our God, who is seated on high? That was such a great reminder to me personally that Jesus reigns no matter what. There is nothing that will happen in this election, no matter what the outcome is, that will change the fact that Jesus is our King. And He is the eternal King, the King of Kings, and his reign will be forevermore. So I hope and I pray that that is as much of an encouragement and a source of peace for you as it was for us as we read through this passage this week together. If you would, either put your hand on your heart maybe, or you can open your hands and your legs or on your knees, whatever is a posture of surrender for you as we enter into worship. I'm going to pray for us to respond to the Lord as our King. Jesus, we love you as our eternal King, as our King of Kings. And we do pray, God, that you would give us peace and rest and hope. Lord, that you would comfort us with the truth that your kingdom is unshakable and your reign is forevermore. Lord, help us to set our hearts and minds on eternity. We just thank you so much for your eternal reign, for your love for us, and for your unshakable kingdom. In Jesus' name, Lord. Amen.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you, we live for you, Jesus. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you. And holy, holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Sing worthy, worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you, we live for you, live it for you, Jesus. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you. And holy, holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Just lead me in your love. Oh, I am surrounded by your love. I'm surrounded by your love today. Thank you.
Hey guys, we're Derek and Ashley. As many of you know, we are preparing to be missionaries in Catalonia, Spain. And we're doing this in partnership with the Gathering Network and the Sending Project here in Kansas City. Back in this past February, we had the great honor of sharing with many of you at the Leadership Training Weekend about our work and our mission. And despite the fact that COVID has flipped the world upside down for many of us, we are pursuing that mission still. The Lord has just continued to call us forward even in these tough times. So we're following Him in faith and doing that. Now, the Gathering leadership wanted us to give you a little bit of an update on where we are now.
Yes. So we are aiming to leave by mid-January 2021. So
Coming up.
Yeah. And this month, on November 20th, we have a big interview and appointment with the consulate, the Spanish consulate in Chicago. So please be praying for that. Currently, we have about 55 financial supporters on our partnership team, both inside and outside the Gathering Network. But we are hoping to add about 20 more families to our team before we go.
Yeah, the Lord is just building an amazing team for us, and we're excited to add more, and we need to add more. Currently, we need to add another $1,600 a month to our incoming budget. So we would love to talk with you about that and see how you can get involved.
Yes. So as Derek already said, much of our preparation and fundraising has been deeply impacted by COVID. I'm sure you guys can imagine, but we really still feel the Lord's call and draw toward this, and we feel like that He's saying now is the time. So we would love your prayers, especially for two big areas. First of all, if you guys could pray with us for this big interview and appointment that coming up, pray for visa approval. A lot of the pieces it's a long process and it's hard to put together, so we would love your prayer cover for that and for visa approval. And also please pray that the rest of our fundraising would come in and that we would add the partners that the Lord has for us to our team, that we can meet our goal by our drop date.
The Lord is building something amazing in this partnership between the Gathering Network and us, and we're excited to talk about that with you and see how you can be involved. We want to share the vision with you, more details, and a little bit more about how you can join us. So if you would like to do that, if there's anything in your heart that says, I want to at least talk with these guys, please reach out to us. We would love to connect with you. One easy way to do that and find out more is at our website, alightshines.org, but you'll also be receiving a little bit more from us in the coming months. We're so excited to be with you and doing this together, and we can't wait to connect with you. Bless you guys.
You guys, welcome to another Sunday service here at the Gathering Network. I'm John, so glad to be with you. Glad that you have made it here this morning. We're going once again into another part of this series on secure attachment, where we're digging back into our earliest childhood experiences and asking how have those experiences shaped us today in the way that we relate. We keep saying, we relate the way that we relate, and the ways that we relate to one another have been shaped by experiences, good or bad, that happened to us when we were very, very, very young. So today we are asking this question: how can we talk about our earliest childhood primary caregivers with honor and honesty? How do we do that with honor and honesty at the same time? And I've been so encouraged as I'm reading the book of John. You're reading the book of John too. We're reading that in the All Church Bible reading together. And in John 1, just like we read this morning, there's this declaration of who Jesus was. It says that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld His glory. That's an important word. We beheld the glory of the man Jesus, who He is. The glory of the one and only begotten Father, full of grace and full of truth. Full of grace and full of truth. I don't know if you felt it the way that I've felt it in my life, but that is always the way that God has dealt with me. God has dealt with me through a tremendous amount of grace, yet also with a lot of truth. And I've always wondered what it would be like to just sit and have coffee with Jesus. And I am sure that what I would feel from Him, even if it's not words that came out of His mouth, that I would sit with Him, and with His soft face and soft eyes, He would look into mine, and He would just be emanating grace while inviting truth from me at the same time. And He was this man, and this scripture calls it His glory. His glory was that He could love us with grace and invite us into truth at the same time, and that those two realities would actually be the essence of His kingdom. That's what He's trying to roll out on the earth. And so here we are today, looking back into our earliest childhood experiences. Most of us are thinking about our caregivers, our earliest childhood caregivers, who were people who were amazing people, who loved us and provided for us and were there for us, and they were also human at the same time. So we want to be people who can carry grace and truth as we look back into our history. I mean, for crying out loud, it's one of the 10 commandments to honor your father and mother. So what we're not wanting to do in this series is blame, or to kind of create ourselves, create a persona of ourselves as victims. We're wanting to take responsibility for our lives, and that requires looking at early experiences with grace and looking at those experiences with truth. And that takes a lot of skill. Jesus was able to hold those realities in Himself without tension, but there's a lot of tension in those realities with you and I. And we need a little bit of help to learn how to, get into those weeds and to do the best we can. Before we move on, I don't want to fail to mention that there are some of you who are watching this morning who really didn't have caregivers or parents that were good for you as you were growing up. In fact, they may have been actually harmful to you, and they may have hurt you in your life. They may have been toxic to you. And I just want to say, I think that you're showing up with a lot of courage to these conversations. And thank you. Thank you for bringing your story into this arena with us. We all belong. We all have a story to tell. We all have something to bring to this. And we believe that God has healing for all of us. And we really also believe that God has healing for you. But I just didn't want to move forward this morning without bringing some mention of that. And thanks for letting me circle back. So I invited my friend, Dr. Todd Fry, to just spend a little bit of time with me on a Zoom call. And I asked him this question. I was like, how do we talk about our parents or our early childhood caregivers with honor and honesty? What will that require of us? And it was an incredible conversation, you guys. And so I'm glad to bring this to you today, my conversation with Dr. Todd Fry. Well, Todd Fry, I'm really glad to be with you, man, and welcome to A Little Time with the Gathering Network, man. Yeah, we are really, really happy to welcome you to this moment, and I want you to know, man, I'm glad to be with you, like genuinely. We have really fond memories of being with you. I mean, you've come to speak into our life together in some really important ways, and a lot of different people around the Gathering Network are connected to you guys, maybe working with you guys, or have in the past, or have been taught by you. You are Mid-American Nazarene. You're the chair of the counseling department there. And man, it's an honor to have you here today, man. Thank you. Thank you for being a friend of the Gathering Network today.
Yeah, of course. The Gathering is kind of a home away from home. I don't attend there. I just know enough people there through lots of different avenues that I have a warm spot in my heart for you guys. So thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, well, I tell you, it feels like an honor and a gift today to be able to call on someone like you to be able to answer a question that started to rise in me as we were watching. I was sitting in my own watch group and we were watching some episodes on the secure attachment, and I just thought, man, I bet we need some kind of episode to talk about how to talk about our primary caregivers holding the tension between honor and honesty at the same time. And I was just like, who in the world could lead us? And I thought about you, and I was like, I just wonder, man, like, is that a thing? Like, is this do you regularly experience, this is my first question.
Yeah.
Do you regularly experience this as a hurdle that people have to kind of overcome in your practice?
Absolutely. Well, I can speak about my practice, and I can speak about me personally too, because this is impact on me personally. You know, at some point in my life, I became aware of things that I wasn't aware of before, that I tracked back to my own family. And when I made that connection, I had always heard things like, don't go backwards, don't pay attention to the past, you can only deal with the present. And, and it's sort of cliche to go back and blame your family for everything in your life and responsibility for who you are. And so those are messages that I was filtering through within the culture, and even within my own family of origin, kind of talking like that. And so when I started to study this, both in my master's and doctoral program, and started to do more reading and really realizing that, wow, so much of our formation really happens in those, especially those early years of, 0 to 24 months, and then then on to, 6 years. And then so much of our brain development happens in that. And then we have the 6 to, the time we launch. It's just massive. I don't know that I can put a percentage on it, but it's so much influence on lifelong patterns of relating to ourselves and others that I started to become a believer. Wow, okay, so this was really important. And as I recognized that within my own experience and thought about how do I share this with my own parents, who by all intent purposes, people would say they were very loving, and I think they are very loving. And that was part of the difficulty for me, was looking at loving parents and saying, how can they be loving and how can they be church going and good people and still have had, in many respects, a real painful influence on me in my own development. And I think the saying that I hear a lot is, well, they did the best they could, so therefore I don't have permission to validate my own internal experience related to what they might or might not have done, both errors of omission and commission that have hurt my own development and has impacted the way that I view myself and my world. So I do see clients come in a similar place. Oftentimes they come in with symptomology that's like depression or anxiety, or they have some trauma responses or addictions. These are kind of the common colds of mental health. And, it doesn't take long to discover that these are very at the top surface level stuff. And then it's really the patterns of the way that they live out their lives, the way they view themselves, and the way they trust or not trust people and relationships and vulnerability and intimacy. And all those things are impacted by the earliest relationships that we have that shape our ability to even regulate emotion and to identify and experience emotion as being primary. And we dismiss parts of ourselves. We compartmentalize out our emotions. We become individualistic. And a lot of those things don't just happen based on personality and temperament. those are actually shaped within the environment of that early caregiving system. And so, so they come in, they have these life difficulties, marriage difficulties, whatever else. And many times it's tracked back to early experiences with parents, and not always just parents, grandparents, neighbors, church members, theology of the church. It's being communicated at those very young formative years, having a junior high camp theology with real life questions, and feeling kind of abandoned by the church, abandoned by God, people who have suffered, had grief, and really kind of understanding God through the lens in which they were parented, So when I try to make a link in therapy to there being an early experience, a younger part of ourselves, I like to separate ourselves into parts, because we really kind of code it in parts neurologically. And so we all have our own little 5-year-old and our own little 14-year-old. And I often talk to little Todd myself, because he's representative of a time in my life where I had a certain type of pain. And it's really interesting, again, like the way that, I don't think I mentioned this yet in this portion of what we were talking about, but I mentioned this too earlier. When we, our brain is the way, it's so amazing and wonderfully made that when it processes information, we have a lower brain region, brainstem and limbic area, which are 2/3 of our brain. So we have 3 regions of the brain. You guys might have already talked about this. And we have our cortical region. Well, the bottom 2 regions don't have the ability to timestamp things. So basically they're sort of timeless. I think it's, honestly, on a side note, I think it's pretty fascinating that we have a God that's outside of time and in time, and we have a brain that's outside of time and in time.
Okay, that's amazing, man. But when you say doesn't timestamp something, so am I getting you right by saying something may happen to me may happen or not happen to me when I'm 5 years old, and that is still alive in me?
Absolutely.
And that it's still being like alive and resonant in my
very alive. Well, especially things that haven't been transitioned. So things get timestamped through a part of our brain called the hippocampus. Hippocampus, when there's a lot of stress, that's mediated by the amygdala in the central nervous system. It sends high signals to the hippocampus to shut down. And so the hippocampus shuts down, coding our experiences into a narrative form when it's under stress. And that's to help us survive. It's almost like we can't remember. If we remember, it's just too traumatic for us to remember. And so things continue to get coded, but they get disorganized. They get coded in a disorganized way, and then they're coded within the body. Then the hippocampus, when it's offline, it's just the only choice our body has is to code it within the body in these lower brain regions. And so it's kind of like a messed up puzzle. It's not been put together. So you hear of like PTSD when people have certain sensations, and they're brought back to responses, but they can't make sense of like where it came from because they have no biographical memory of it. It's because the brain has dissociated itself through the hippocampus. And so in order to help us survive a situation that we consider to be either life or death or traumatic. And attachment is packed with trauma. Attachment experiences has all sorts of opportunities where there's unintentional neglect and or abuse that's going on. And so trauma is happening. And the degree of trauma is dependent upon the exposure with the parent and their capacity to be able to parent well enough to mediate. No parent is going to mediate trauma completely. There's no such thing as a parent that does a perfect parenting. Parents will have trauma, and we'll talk maybe about this a little bit later, but it's really it's less about whether they inflict trauma, and it depends on the degree of trauma, right? I mean, a parent sexually abusing a child inflicts a degree of trauma on them that is lifelong as far as managing it. But there's lots of different ways in which we can inflict. We can just miss something. Our kid can come up and pull on our pant leg and show us a pretty picture, and we're too preoccupied on our phone. And so we disregard their bid for connection, and that leaves a wound, a little small T trauma wound. And those can be repaired, and the repair ends up being more important than anything. Not the events, but the parental repair. And so we're really talking about a repair later in this non-timestamp mind. The hope in the non-timestamp mind, because it hasn't crossed the hippocampus, is that once we can connect to it, we can turn it into biographical memory, and we can also discharge the emotion associated with it. Once the emotion is discharged, it stamps it. So I can stamp my 5-year-old. I can timestamp it because the cortex timestamps things. And so I have to work its way into our cortex to get it timestamped. Once things timestamped, it's in the past. So things are always with us in the present until they get timestamped. And so we have all these experiences in childhood that if not given a safe repair space, they stay inside of us and they create havoc.
Yeah.
We find patterns in which to relate to what it was like to exist in that trauma that we carry with us, like avoidance.
Right. We've said a lot. We've said through this series that there's a book called The Relational Soul that I read that gave me this phrase: you relate the way you relate.
Yeah.
Like you relate the way you relate.
Yeah.
You're talking about getting caught in these like cycles of relating.
Yes.
And what's in there with us are these broken patterns of relating that haven't been soothed or resolved quite yet. Is that right? Am I getting you?
Yeah, exactly. Resolved. We use different terminology: converted, metabolized, conditioned, resolved, maybe more of a lay person, but basically the body has to do its thing. So going back to that 5-year-old inside of us, becomes important that 5-year-old has a voice when that 5-year-old didn't have a voice at the time.
Right.
Or have an emotion they could express. It didn't have an action they could take on.
Yeah.
They couldn't defend themselves. They knew they had to be quiet or they'd make things worse. So they went to the room and they cried alone. And so that is not a metabolized experience. One of my favorite authors says it's never too late to have a good childhood. Thanks be to God. We can go back and change our childhood. There is such a thing as going back and changing the past. And that was one of the things that was told to me was you can't change the past. So why pay attention to the past? Right. And neuroscience is saying, no, that's absolutely wrong. We can go and change the past because of the non-timestamp brain, which is a means of grace from God.
Right.
We're not doomed to the experiences that we have in our past because we can actually go back there with a loving another or with the original source of our pain, and we can mend it as a 5-year-old.
Right.
And then it can develop us right back up to our current chronological age. Because even though we operate within a certain chronological age, we might actually emotionally or operate within a different age. Like we might emotionally operate as a 17-year-old, but chronologically within time we're 42.
So do you find that people go through a moment in your work with them where the idea of talking to like little Todd or little John or trying to find that place or sit with that kid is corny, or that it feels like this weird like psychological mumbo jumbo? That's the first question. The second question is, do you find it hard for people to incorporate the word trauma into their experience? Because trauma feels so big. And it is so big. You just said there's big T and little t trauma. Right. Can you tell us just a bit about those two experiences? Like people kind of, when have you seen like the light kind of go off for people that were like, oh yeah, okay, yeah.
There's a real mixed relationship. A lot of people would start with like, talk to my 5-year-old. Like, what are you talking about? Like that big of a jump. I don't say like, hey, let's talk to your 5-year-old. Work our way into this awareness that there's these younger parts of us that do exist, that play themselves out all the time, especially in our interpersonal relationships. And so, when you get scared if you get scared and you get overwhelmed and you shut down, it's your adult version of doing what you did when you were 8 and your dad was in your room pointing his finger in your face.
Right.
And you knew you couldn't escape. And all of a sudden the two connect. This non-timestamp mind connects with your current day. And your 43-year-old self is looking at your wife and saying, in so many terms, here's my dad coming at me again. And it's not your dad, but it's hard to separate that in the mind of the 5-year-old. And so whether you like it or not, you are not 41. You are all your ages. Right. And they're all speaking into who you are. And that's why we sometimes can't make sense as to why we respond the ways that we do. I think probably Paul, when he said, why can't I change the things I want to change? And I think he was talking about younger parts of himself and his own development, his own attachment was like these patterns of things that you scratch your head and you go, I go home for Christmas and I have a PhD in counseling and I find myself acting like a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
Like I'm responding, I'm getting small, I can't interact. I mean, everyone can relate to that, right? Going for Thanksgiving, you're like, what am I doing? Yeah. My wife looks at me like, what are you doing? Like, I don't know. It's such a reflex.
Yeah.
given the right circumstance and the right people, I can start to revert back to ways of being that were younger, unless those parts get addressed and mended and attended to.
And that's the work you do. I think that really normalizes the experience of a person going to therapy. You know, I think we're growing out of it as a society, sort of the need for therapy in our lives. But I think that a part of our like historical narrative, that what we grew up with, was that people who went to therapy had something very extremely wrong.
Yes.
And actually, we all have a need to make sense of our story.
Absolutely.
You know, which is the attachment work. I think we're learning that the work of, you know, kind of being reparented or coming back into secure attachment, and the beauty, and this is kind of off topic, just to exclaim it, I guess, to say that God's designed to give us the Holy Spirit to pastor us and counsel us and attune to us and be with us, and for the Father to reparent us in his love. For that all to be happening in an office like your office, where people are kind of making sense of their stories, even the little T stories, you know.
Yes, multi-traumas, you bet.
Yeah, where I feel like people are like, well, I wasn't sexually abused, or I didn't have this, or I didn't have that.
My parents came to my volleyball games, you know, and they're like, what could it be? That's actually, and I'm glad you brought that up. Those are the hardest ones. Really the ones who have specific memories of, let's say, being physically abused by an alcoholic parent, or the one who was sexually abused, they actually have something to point to for what's going on in their life. But the ones that don't have those real extreme types of trauma, they are mostly self-blaming.
Right.
Like, what's wrong with me? I had a good home. I had everything. And when you really look at what does make up a good home, what makes up an accessible, responsive, engaged parent, we use the R to describe parenting. Accessible, responsive, and engaged. They'll find that, wow, my parents were like, were accessible, you know, like if like they were around, but they weren't very responsive, or they certainly weren't emotionally engaged. You know, I mean, they showed up on my things, they paid for my prom, they, you know, and they were around, but they weren't the R and the E. And they didn't. We actually have another acronym called CARE too. They weren't curious. And so though those things we may be convinced that we don't need those things because we need to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. But when it comes to being healthy human beings in life, we need all those things: the caring, the affirmation, the responsiveness, the engagement, the acceptance, the accessibility. We need all those things from our parents. And so when I ask questions like, well, how did your family relate to emotions in your home? Were you given a lot of space to feel? And what happened when you did feel an emotion? Was that encouraged? And how did they respond to that emotion? Especially emotion like sadness or fear or anger. The one emotion that's excluded is usually the one emotion that was excluded in your family, that was unsafe, or one person could feel it, but no one else could. So dad was angry, but no one else could be angry. So you transition that way of relating, even when outside of that context. So you exclude certain parts of your experience because they need to be excluded to survive in the home. And so the new emotion that's actually been added is sexual excitement.
Okay, talk to me about this.
So sexual excitement is all these emotions are adaptive in nature. They're adaptive to have, meaning that they're transformative, they're life growing when they're given room to be expressed and to be received and to be held. But let's say sexual excitement is something that you feel, but you suppressed inside of you because you grew up in a conservative home that didn't talk about sex. Allow you to be able to experience sexual excitement, or you did as an adolescent and you felt ashamed for it. Right. So then that emotion gets excluded and it gets diverted underground. So all these emotions are meant to be experienced in between the space between you and I. Not alone. Right. When they become maladaptive is when those emotions are experienced alone. And so when sexual excitement is experienced alone, when anger is experienced alone, when sadness is experienced alone, even when joy is experienced alone, it becomes maladaptive. And so all these emotions are intended to be metabolized in a relationship. You know, the Swedish proverb that says double joy is half sorrow. Sorrow shared is half sorrow. Joy shared is double joy. So it's kind of that idea that all emotion is intended to be metabolized between you and I. And so these emotions can get suppressed. And so that's really around neglect. It's not like when we think about neglect, we think no food, you know, we were
Locked
like
in a closet, like
we're outside, you know, you try to think of things like Sybil, you know, but it's really not. It's much more subtle than that.
Yeah.
Like just missed bids.
Yeah. There's something I just want to shed a little light here. I guess speaking out of my own experience, I just interviewed a man named Jim Wilder. He's a neurotheologian. He was talking about how long it takes for genuine secure attachment to actually evolve in a family tree. Yeah. He made this claim that it takes somewhere between 3 and 4 generations, 3 and 4 different iterations of a family leveling up from the experience before to get to a place where it's like a new experience. And I thought about my dad's experience.
Yeah.
I thought about how my parents, you know, I mean, here we are, we're talking, I mean, attachment theory at this point is like pop theology, you know, psychology. Like there's podcasts, there's books. Yeah, right. It's just, there's people going and having coffee and talking about attachments. You know, it's like, it's on the scene now, you know, if you're listening. But it wasn't for my parents.
No.
It wasn't. And there wasn't brain science that was readily accessible to them. There was some parenting books, but when you look at the amount of information that we have now versus what they had then, certainly what their parents had, you know? Right. And I look at the way my father fathered me in comparison to the way that his father fathered him.
Yes.
And I also look at the way that my dad reviews the way he fathered me. So I asked him one time, I said, Dad, I'm 2 years old again, or 3 years old again. Yeah. And I was at his house and I pointed over there and I said, I'm sitting right over there and I tell you, I hate you. Yeah. What do you do? And he goes, well, what would I have done when you were 3 or what would I have done now?
Oh, that's telling. Yeah.
Well, and just that one thing, it released something in me. Yeah. Like, all right, we grow, you know?
Right.
And I felt like my dad was even inviting me in and saying, we can talk about what I would have done then and what I would have done now. Yeah. And so I'm curious to know, man, gosh, I don't know where I want to go with that. I guess I want to ask, just for the sake of time, so we can just get to it. I mean, how do people begin to, like, I think what I just even did, you know, was I kind of honored my dad, you know? You know what I mean? I told a very honoring story about my dad, right? Yeah. But how do we honor our parents?
Right.
And how can we then also be honest? Because I do think that when I was 3 years old, if I would have said, I hate you to my dad, I would have been punished for that.
Yeah.
My dad knows that.
Right.
But how do people begin to hold honor and honesty, intention, and begin to step into some of this work that you're describing so that we can make sense of our stories?
Right.
Because, you know, it did affect me that I would have been punished to say that I hate my dad, you know? So how can we move in there? You know?
Great question. And we need to come to a place where we can be honest, as congruently honest about the impact as we can. I'll answer that question in just a second. Let me also mention, this is related but important. We oftentimes don't give ourselves permission to have our 5-year-old feelings because we're adults. But if you think about it in time, you want to think, what would the 5-year-old been thinking? Not the adult thinking for the 5-year-old. Mm-hmm. What would the 5-year-old been thinking? Let me give you an example of this. My client's parents inadvertently left her at home. They had like 6 kids. Mm-hmm. It's like the Home Alone scenario, right? Mm-hmm. And so they got in the car and they drove off, and she was the only one in this farmhouse, and she was really little, probably like 3. It's one of her earliest memories. And she, in her 3-year-old mind, they're never coming back.
Right.
So she fumbles around the house, cries, looks out the window, no one's coming back. So she remembers crawling up onto a stool and reaching up for the phone to call someone. She doesn't know how to call. She just knows this is what mom and dad do. And so she picks up the phone, and there's the tone, but she doesn't know who to call. And she's just talking into the phone and crying. And then she can't get hold of anyone. And so she just sits down, crawls underneath the chair, and falls asleep. So this particular incident, interestingly enough, her parents did return. They didn't have a good repair. And they're like, hey, where were you? And then she's like, got up. They go, come on, get in the car. Stop hiding. And so, but she was devastated. I mean, from a little 3-year-old perspective, she sees this whole event going on, and she's coding it in her own body as, I just got abandoned. Right. And this could happen again. And so some of those patterns, I won't go into the details, have lasted for her whole life. Now, that's not to say that parents that forget their parents have destroyed their kids for life, because it's usually a pattern of those types of things happening that affirm that experience or bad repair. But she always thought about that experience as, that's just so silly. I know now my parents are coming back. But when I gave her permission for it not to be silly, not from the 3-year-old's perspective, and all of a sudden she connected to it emotionally, and she began to cry for that 3-year-old and feel the fear inside her body of what it was like for her to be 3 and be standing in that room and wandering around. And then finally, which I understand neurologically, she went into a dorsal vagal state, and she actually prepared herself to die underneath the chair from a central nervous system perspective. And so just permission getting. Okay, so now back to your original question, which is, what can you do? First, I hope I'm answering this, but first you have to start with your own humility if you're a parent. And you recognize that I too make mistakes as a parent. Do all the time. And that my parents made mistakes all the time. In order for me, it's easier for me to accept the fact that my parents made mistakes if I could accept the fact that I do too. So, right? I mean, I miss things. I've said and done things. If I had to do it over again, I would do it very differently. You know, I'm probably did something today. Every day is a new opportunity to fail and to succeed. And so accepting that is really important. And if you can accept that within yourself, then you can say, okay, well, my parents were me, and they also were struggling like me. And so I can accept the fact that they were struggling parents too. So that gives you kind of humility to think about them, not in a way where you want to completely condemn them, you know, for being such horrible parents. But you can see that they are you and you are them. And in doing so, it gives you space then to say to yourself, then if I made mistakes, then they must have made mistakes. And if they made mistakes, those mistakes, it's okay for me to name those mistakes. And first you have to assess whether they're a safe enough person to name it to.
Right. Are they a safe person for me to name it to?
Right. I need to name it to somebody who's going to give me permission and curiosity to be able to hold my frame in the midst of what it felt like for me, you know, to not discourage it or not to minimize it or to water it down. Just give it to me like I did with that client. Like, tell me what it was like for that little girl. Right? Because I imagine that little girl was terrified. And then all of a sudden she was given permission to be the feeling, to experience the feeling that she really was having. And so we all need a space to do that. Sometimes when we assess the people that, like parents in our life, we say, well, if I went to my parent, oh my word, they'd be defensive. They'd basically do the same thing they did when I was a kid. Defensive, they would attack, you know, and there's not enough internal flexibility. I'd be re-injured in that vulnerability. And so with my clients, I'll have them assess like what's likelihood that you'll actually get a competent response. And maybe with your dad, he's grown. He may be like, man, I'm sorry. And it's a really powerful space to forgive, to seek forgiveness and healing if you can actually get it from the person that inflicted the pain. But for most of us, that can't happen because the people that are adult parents who are also bound by their own societal and growing up attachment histories are still stuck in patterns that can't receive their kids in the way, especially in these arenas, maybe the emotionality, vulnerability, or I know like my parents, that was really not the arena that they grew up in. You know, it was a non-emotional, very work-oriented, hard work environment. And so they don't have some of that emotional availability. They don't value it. And so, but having said that, all we need is a surrogate. Surrogate attachment figures.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to always go to our original attachment figure. We can find a surrogate, someone who's symbolic or representative. I feel like I'm a surrogate all the time.
Yeah.
I'm so many people's dad.
Yeah.
It's so funny. The older I get, the more gray I get. The more I get that. Right? I used to get boyfriend and husband. Now I get dad. But I think that, when people are able to offer a competent, caring response, then we can carry the role of surrogate and we can heal those attachment wounds without them having to go to those parents. But identifying them, important to even sharing them with the surrogate to say, yes, that was my experience. And yes, that was painful. And yes, this is how I felt. And I'm going to tell you, and you're going to sit there and look me in my eyes and go, absolutely, you have the right to feel that way. Right?
Yeah.
Even if you know better now, you may not have known better then. And what matters is what it was like for that 17-year-old.
Yeah.
Or that 18-year-old. And by giving them permission to do that and to feel the safety that you provide in your response to them, they're able to begin to start to metabolize those experiences.
Do you think we can do that with each other? I mean, do you have an image of the church that would be like, man, it would be incredible if some of the sage members of a church,
absolutely,
could kind of move into this like space where they're able to see the next generation and just say, I see you and I'm with you. And
yes, absolutely. People are always hunting for someone to provide a healthy space in which for transformation to occur.
Yeah.
They're drawn towards healthy people, or some people actually avoid healthy people because they don't want to face the pain.
Right.
They know there's something there. And they know if they get close enough to someone who's willing and curious to listen, it's going to come out. I mean, every week I hear this. Clients return, they're like, I'm glad to be back, but I'm not ready to feel the pain again.
Right.
Like going to the dentist. Yeah. They know they need to get through the pain to get to the other side. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
Avoidance is not the pathway to transformation.
Right. Avoidance is not the pathway to transformation. Whoa. Yes.
You got to stand in the face of what was congruently happening. Yeah. Nothing gets transitioned without standing in the face of the fullness of the pain.
Nothing gets transitioned. Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be with the person that did it to you. Again, because we can transfer our healing experiences onto other people. Thanks be to God. Yeah. We can go to the elders of the church or whatever, the seniors in the church, and we can look at them we look at them. We can work our way through that. But the people who are leading in the church and who are these elders need to be prepared to know how to respond.
Right.
That they're not giving advice or making excuses or doing things that discourage the transition of that material.
Man, that really is, we've said it to every person that we've been on a call with. My dream, for our church is a 2.0 experience of this missional community, maybe what will be in the future for us, like a house church experience that are to the world. We say it again and again and again. The greatest billboard that we have right now for the world are emotionally healthy spiritual families that work.
Right.
Where someone can come in and there can be a healing presence there that can help, make sense of the past, in the light and the grace of God, and in the light of his love. That's really the hope, man. All right, you guys, there was a lot there, and I'm so thankful for Dr. Fry for coming along and giving us just what felt like truckloads of wisdom and insight today. We're going to jump into some dialogue and some discussion. May God be with you as you guys try to apply some of the things you learned today. And let's just continue to trust that little by little, bit by bit, God is bringing us into a greater application where we will really be able to apply all of this very soon. Right now, we're still very much in what I would call a prophetic stage, where we are just trying to say that God is wanting secure attachment with us. And so there's not going to be a lot of application right now, but that application is coming. The application that we are in right now is staying in our story. And for many of us, that means staying in our pain and not trying to parachute out of it, not trying to avoid it. We're trying to stay with it, to let our pain talk to us, to let our memories talk to us, to let our life speak to us so that we can go forward in the grace that God has for us and genuinely from the bottom up be transformed in this life. You guys have a good time in the application and discussion this morning. God bless you guys.